This episode of Monster Memories is brought to you by Fangoria Magazine, the greatest horror magazine since 1979. For 20% off your magazine and merch orders, use the promo code DEADNOISEBLOG at checkout when you visit shop.fangoria.com. Let's face it, there's no shortage of Christmas movies out there. Frankly enough, there's even an abundance of Christmas horror movies, and while each one is unique and influential in their own right, the greatest of all time for me will always be Gremlins. Much like Die Hard, this is a movie that's very popular in the debate of whether or not it's really a Christmas movie, which is just utterly ridiculous in my opinion. I mean, it takes place during Christmas, there's snow and carolers, Santa Claus, and Christmas trees everywhere. The characters actively talk about and prepare to celebrate the holidays, and Gizmo was a literal Christmas present from the narrator to his son. Add some monsters wreaking havoc on a small town, and you've got the perfect Christmas movie. Right out the gate, this movie was destined for success. Not only was the concept original and engaging, but it was also released at the perfect time and associated with the perfect people. In the 1980s, the horror genre was reaching new heights in terms of practical effects. For example, John Landis's 1981 masterpiece An American Werewolf in London created the category for Best Makeup in the Academy Awards, because Rick Baker created the best werewolf transformation sequence of all time through a mix of prosthetic applications and animatronics, among other techniques. Additionally, this was a time where it was becoming more and more popular to blend genres, with American Werewolf being an example of horror mixed with comedy, and John Carpenter's 1982 remake of The Thing being a hybrid between horror and sci-fi. Now, as far as the personnel behind the film goes, Gremlins had some of the best on board. The concept was conceived by screenwriter Chris Columbus, who later became known for writing The Goonies and directing the first two Home Alone movies. Steven Spielberg loved the idea and saw a ton of potential with its originality, so he served as the executive producer for the film and had it produced under his production company, Amblin Entertainment. The man in the director's chair was Joe Dante, who was chosen by Spielberg after working with him on the 1983 Twilight Zone movie, as well as being a big fan of his 1981 werewolf film The Howling. While some people had more input than others, this trio has their stamp written all over this movie. For example, the smiley face sticker from The Howling is on the fridge in the Peltzer's house. The marquee of the theater at the beginning of the movie has the working titles for Spielberg's films E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind on it, and even though this was only Chris Columbus's second feature-length film, it's easy to see how developed his writing style was at this point. And you can see a lot of the style from his later works imprinted on this movie. The cast is made up of Hoyt Axton as Rand Peltzer, who's the narrator of the movie and the man who gives Gizmo as a Christmas present to his son, along with supposedly ad-libbing all of his lines, but don't quote me on that. And Zach Galligan made his feature film debut as Billy Peltzer, the protagonist who breaks every rule of the Mogwai within 45 minutes of the movie, along with Frances Lee McCain as his mom, who would later play the mom of Marty McFly in Back to the Future, as well as the mom of Dewey and Tatum in the first Scream movie. There's also Polly Holliday as that evil bitch Mrs. Ruby Deagle, who thankfully gets what she deserves later in the film, and Phoebe Cates as Kate Barringer, Billy's love interest. Other standouts include 80s icon Corey Feldman and the legendary character actor Dick Miller, who both give great performances for the limited times they're on screen. Every actor seemed to work extremely well together because their performances are so convincing that there's never a moment where you're taken out of the movie. When the Gremlins are tearing the town of Kingston Falls apart, you believe it because the actors appear genuinely terrified when they encounter them. And as far as the Gremlins go, the puppets and animatronics were designed by Chris Wallace, who previously worked on films like E.T. and Star Wars Return of the Jedi, and would later go on to work on David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly. Wallace had to try out a few different looks for the Mogwai because Spielberg would make a lot of tweaking suggestions, sometimes at the last minute, and they shot a lot of their scenes in low light in order to hide some of the imperfections of working with puppets, like having exposed strings and stuff like that, which was also the reason one of the rules of the Mogwai was to keep it away from bright lights. The props weren't cheap either. With each gremlin costing around $30,000 to $40,000, it was a rule that at the end of each day of filming, production security made everyone on set open their cars up to make sure nothing was stolen. Not only were they wicked pricey, but there were also a bunch of technical problems during filming, especially with the Mogwai puppets. One day on set, the Peltzer family dog bit one of the puppets, and it set production back 7 to 9 hours behind schedule. But even without that incident, the Mogwai puppets were unreliable and malfunctioned more often than the Gremlins because of their small size, which obviously infuriated the crew. Funny enough, the scene where the Gremlins first hatch and start throwing darts at Gizmo was actually written in for the crew because that was on a list they eventually wrote down that was called the Horrible Things to Do to Gizmo list. With how much the Gremlins bully Gizmo in the first and second movie, it makes me wonder how many of those ideas came from that list. There wasn't exactly a concrete script for the Gremlins as far as their lines or voiceovers go, but they still had a rough ability to speak. Everybody knows Gizmo was voiced by Howie Mandel, but the Gremlins had a whole team of voice actors. Frank Welker provided the voice of Stripe, and around 10 other actors provided the voice for the rest of the Gremlins, including Michael Winslow from the Police Academy movies. Now, along with the argument of Gremlins' legitimacy as a Christmas movie, its status as a horror movie is also commonly put into question. Sure, it's more family-friendly than other popular horror films, but this was also the movie that created the PG-13 rating. Originally released at a PG rating, the MPAA felt that some of the events of the movie were too violent for that rating, but not severe enough to warrant it being rated R, thus creating the PG-13 that we know today. I feel like the Christmas theme and the more humorous antics of the Gremlins towards the end of the film make people forget how scary this movie can be. It's more suspenseful than some people may remember, especially during the scenes where the Gremlins first hatch from their cocoons. What's also interesting is that it was going to be even more gruesome at first. Chris Columbus had a much scarier original script written, with a couple removed scenes including one in which the Gremlins disembowel the family dog and kill Mrs. Peltzer, and another where they invade a McDonald's and eat the customers. But unsurprisingly enough, Warner Brothers wanted the movie to be more family-friendly, so naturally these scenes were cut from the final film. Another big change that was in the original script was the fact that Gizmo was supposed to turn into Stripe instead of having them be separate characters, but Spielberg wanted Gizmo to stay as a Mogwai so there could still be a presence of a benevolent Mogwai, and ultimately that ended up being the right decision because everybody loves Gizmo. So in case there's still any doubt somehow, yes, Gremlins is a Christmas movie and a horror movie, and a fantastic one on both fronts. The sequel, Gremlins 2: The New Batch, is great too, and it doesn't get anywhere near the credit it deserves. For starters, it's more rewatchable because it doesn't take place during a specific time of year like the first one, and it's also exactly what a Gremlins movie should be: off the wall, unpredictable, and a great time. Some people dislike it because they can't take it seriously, but that's the whole point of the movie. It's a phenomenal commentary on the meaninglessness of pop culture and corporate empires, but it's also made to poke fun of the concept of sequels themselves. They put everything on the table, and it took so many turns that you couldn't predict what was going to happen next. And that's exactly the whole point of the Gremlins themselves. They're meant to shake things up and disrupt the environments around them, so it makes perfect sense for everything to hit the fan in this movie. The only people who don't like this movie just hate fun, that's all there is to it. Technologically, it's even better than the first movie. Not only are the Gremlin puppets by effects icon Rick Baker more articulate and expressive than the ones in the first movie, but there's a much greater variety, which is awesome. Even the new batch of Mogwais look different, and they all have a unique identity and personality, and I think that's just the best, especially Mohawk. He's my favorite in the whole series. Mohawk's a badass, we love Mohawk in this house. Another thing that's great about both of these movies is the abundance of references and inside jokes and Easter eggs that are hidden throughout both movies. There are some that I talked about earlier like the E.T. stuff, but just the homages to previous horror and sci-fi films are enough to appease any monster fan. You've got Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Day of the Triffids, the Hammer horror series. I mean, I could go on for days about it, but the fact that they cared enough to slide all those little details in there just makes it that much better. I've got a deep love for both of these movies because much like Jaws, I saw these at an extremely young age. I want to say I was 8 when I saw Gremlins the first time, and maybe 9 or 10 when I saw the second one, but I was hooked from the first time I saw the first movie. Like I said, it's a family-friendly movie, but it still has its moments, and there were a couple points where I got a bit spooked out, but towards the end I found myself thinking the Gremlins were more funny than scary, especially when they were in the bar and in the theater, and it got to the point where I even started to root for them over the people. I enjoyed the movie so much that I just wanted to keep watching it over and over again, and then I got interested in how it was made and how the Gremlins looked so real and lifelike even though they were puppets. From there, I watched the behind the scenes features that were on my DVD, and I was just so fascinated with how the puppets were brought to life the way they were. Here's another fun fact. One of my favorite things in my entire horror memorabilia collection is a stunt puppet replica of one of the Gremlins from the second movie. Hands down the greatest Christmas gift I've ever gotten in my life. Thanks, Grandma. So yeah, needless to say, when I think of the movies that had the greatest impact on me, these are two that immediately come to mind. I watch Gremlins 2 year-round, and the first film is always in rotation this time of year, and if it's not on your holiday watch list, I highly suggest changing that. So with that, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday season. This is the 5th and final Monster Memories video this year, and I gotta say, it's been a blast making these videos, and I can't wait to do more in the new year. But until the next one, I'm gonna go ahead and let Rand Peltzer finish things off here, so listen closely.
So if your air conditioner goes on the fritz, or your washing machine blows up, or your video recorder conks out, before you call the repairman, turn on all the lights, check all the closets and cupboards, look under all the beds, because you never can tell. There just might be a gremlin in your house.